Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to wait a couple of more minutes for any last minute people to sign in, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, Fiona, this is Patricia again. I don't have the control panel up, so if you need to pause me at any point, I probably won't see the chat, so we'll just invite you to just dive in and say pause,
Okay.
Patricia, okay? Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. So welcome, everyone. My name's Fiona Lewis, and I'm pleased you're joining us on this webinar today that's hosted by AMAC. AMAC is a leading funder of research into bone marrow failure diseases in Canada, and our organization supports patients and caregivers across the country who are living with aplastic anemia, myelodysplastic syndromes, and PNH. I am the patient support liaison for BC and Alberta, and I invite you to visit our website to find out more about our services across Canada. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to familiarize you with the control panel that you should see on the right of your screen. And you can click on the small arrow in the orange box to open or close the control panel. And once it's open, you will see that there's a question box where you can type in questions or comments for us. Your audio will be muted during the presentation, but I will unmute everyone at the end for questions. And also, we will be recording the webinar today so that we can post it on our website. So I'm pleased to introduce Patricia Williams to present today's webinar on mindful self-compassion for caregivers. Patricia's career is characterized by a mix of compassion and creativity. She has an MA in Counselling Psychology and is a registered art therapist, Canadian Certified Counsellor, and visual artist. She completed her mindful self-compassion teacher training with Kristen, Neff, and Christopher Germer, the co-founders of MSC, and offers the official 8-week MSC program in Victoria. Patricia also co-facilitates a group called Creating Compassionate Community, which moved to an online format after COVID-19. Other shorter online adaptations of MSC will soon be available, including one for healthcare communities. Patricia also facilitates workshops and retreats based on her own published model called ONEBird, which integrates mindfulness, self-compassion, and creative expression. She teaches art therapy at the Canadian International Institute of Art Therapy. So as I mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions at the end of the presentation. And you can type any questions into the window on the right as Patricia's presenting, and I will read them out to her at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patricia to begin the webinar.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And thank you everyone who's here today. I know it takes commitment to even carve out an hour in our busy lives, so truly thank you. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk about something that's so near to my heart. So thank you again, Fiona, and for the association that you're connected with. I wanted to mention that although the webinar is directed to caregivers, that the information applies to those living with chronic conditions and really has the benefits, many of the benefits apply to most people. So welcome each one of you. I also want to acknowledge that I live and work and play on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, known today as the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich people. And I agree to live and work and walk softly on these ancestral lands. I want to also acknowledge that we are living in a time of the pandemic, as you know, but to acknowledge the many ripples that that creates throughout the political, social, cultural, and economic fabric of our lives, and just to acknowledge that you, in addition to all that you deal with on a daily basis, we are now living in this most uncertain, challenging time. The other thing, and I will get started, I keep saying one more thing before we begin, but one more thing, the slides, some of them are rather dense, and that's in part so that you'll have this as a resource to go back to later. So, welcome. This is what I thought we'd try to do within an hour. I may skip over bits, but as I said, you'll have these slides to refer to. But what we will talk about is what is mindful self-compassion. We'll look at the research with a little bit of emphasis on burnout and caregiver resilience. We may or may not dive into the physiology of self-compassion, but I will say a bit about how self-judgment and self-criticism impact the body, and then how self-compassion equally impacts the physiology of our body in a good way. Then I want to move us into at least one of the two practices and still leave time for some questions. So I'll try not to speak too fast, and Fiona, I ask that you just jump in and say, slow down, Patricia, if that does happen. But this is what we're aiming for. So what is it? Well, before I say that, I want to address, and this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, what's the problem with self-care? Well, of course, it's extremely important. You should, if you can, exercise, eat well, whatever your variation of self-care, whatever that includes, very important. The problem, if we want to call it that, with self-care is that generally it's happening outside of providing care, not in the midst of it, not in the midst of challenges. So, for example, you can't say to somebody that you're caring for, hey, whoa, I'm overwhelmed, I got to go get a massage, right? We don't take time for self-care when we're really struggling. But what we can do is calm ourselves, and that then ripples and calms the people that we're with. And self-compassion, then, how it's different from self-care, one of the key ways is that we can call on it while we're in the moment, on the run, in the fly, however you want to see it. So mindful self-compassion has got just stacks of research supporting its effectiveness. And overarchingly, what we see is when we are compassionate towards ourselves, we're less likely to be depressed and anxious and stressed. In a very general way, I'll say some more specific things about that. But in a general way, as our self-compassion grows, we are more likely to be happy, to be resilient and optimistic about the future. So it has this overarching impact on our psychological well-being. So we talk, when we ask the question, what is mindful self-compassion? And I'll say MSC, that's the acronym. MSC is two things. It's the program, and it's also the skills we cultivate within ourselves. So the program, as Fiona mentioned, is an 8-week program. It includes a half-day retreat. So it's about 26 hours altogether. It's pretty comprehensive. And when you attend that, it involves talking and discussions and exercises big emphasis on experiential practices and both formal and informal meditation. And then there is also this expectation of a home practice and a silent retreat. And you may want to take note, the workbook that we recommend now is called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. But if this topic intrigues you, I'd recommend getting it. It's a easy to work through, well-written book on the topic. So, and it's readily available at Amazon and many bookstores. So the program, these are the objectives of it. So why you might want to focus on self-compassion, mindful self-compassion, and these are also supported by research. So we see that decrease in self-criticism, anxiety, depression, shame, an overall measurable improvement in well-being, and the ability to regulate emotions. Okay, we sometimes think of that as a goal of childhood, emotional regulation, but gosh, even as adults, we can benefit from that. And I'll talk more about how mindfulness helps us manage and navigate that. And then we see motivation not through that harsh inner critic, but rather with kindness and wishes for our own well-being. Very big impact on all kinds of relationships. And then I highlight for you folks this reduction in what is commonly called compassion fatigue and in burnout. So as an inner resource, we cultivate those things I just outlined, and essentially it is over and over bringing compassion to ourselves when we're struggling. And I like to think of it like it's not a fair weather friend. It's not the friend that's there for the good times, okay? It's the one that's there when you're really struggling, when life is tough and it isn't going the way you thought it would, or you're not performing the way you hoped you would, or your health isn't what you had imagined. So this resource is different than self-care in that it's there when we're suffering. Okay, bang, I meant to warn you, you were going to see a sad face. So what happens? Since you're muted, go ahead and make the sound that you would make if this little one was in your kitchen and you just, oh, there he is. I'm guessing it was something like, aw, aw. So that's the universal sound regardless of language, which is aw. And then we have a natural unfolding of thoughts and feelings. And that's what compassion is. We notice. You noticed immediately that little one was suffering. And for a moment, your brain mirror neurons resonated with that. So you feel a bit of the suffering. And then the natural inclination of human beings is to want to offer kindness, offer compassion, and help alleviate that suffering. And in the bigger picture of compassion, outside of just that little fellow I showed you, we also recognize that suffering itself, as well as personal failure and imperfection and inadequacy, is shared by all human beings. So that's also part of what compassion is. So the natural question, what's self-compassion? It's acting the same way you do to others when you're falling short, when you don't like something about yourself. And rather than ignoring the pain, you actually acknowledge it. This is hard. This is difficult. And again, you ask, and how can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? It's a tall order, treating yourself the way you would a dear friend who was suffering or struggling with the same issue. But I welcome you to contemplate that. And if we had more time, I'd take you through an exercise where you really explore how you talk to yourself, when you back into that car in the parking lot or whatever your particular struggle is on a given day, and how you talk to a dear friend who's made the same mistake or is suffering in the same way. So these are the three core elements. So we talk about self-kindness, which is pretty much what it says right there, offering the self-warmth and kindness when difficulty is present, recognizing we're not alone, that part of being human means that we suffer, And mindfulness, this is the one that we really practice in the training program. It's not just awareness of what's struggle you're facing and what emotions are present, but acceptance in a balanced way. So this all sounds good. Here's the 3 components. We're going to practice them before we end today, but they have a dark side, okay? So the dark side, as you might guess, of self-kindness, the first component is self-criticism or self-judgment. And it's in our Western culture in particular, we tend to cultivate that self-judgment and self-criticism more than some other cultures in the world. So we want to know these 2 opposing poles, because mindfulness is going to ask us, am I sitting in self-kindness here, or am I believing what that inner critic is saying at this moment? The dark side of understanding that we're all in this boat together, suffering and joy and, you know, lightness and darkness, that we're all in it together. The dark side is this perverse sense of aloneness that we feel when we let ourselves down or life has let us down. We feel like I'm the only one that's struggling in this way, or what's wrong with me that this has happened. And so the call as we cultivate self-compassion is to keep coming back to our common humanity and understanding that we really aren't alone. And that doesn't mean to diminish the struggle or the suffering, but to recognize that in a very equanimous way, this is part of being a human being. And finally, the dark side of mindfulness is, and half the time we're not mindful. Okay, half the time the human brain is in the default network, the default mode network, and we're looking for problems. And in that space, we may avoid what's present. Whether it's an emotion or a situation, we may choose to avoid, or the opposite, we may be completely engulfed by it. So that you might go in a moment from, I'm angry, oh, I shouldn't be angry, what's wrong with me, I'm an angry person, therefore I'm a bad person. And that's an exaggeration, but that's how over-identifying with our emotions can just send us like a wave has washed over us and, you know, knocked our feet out from under us, because we suddenly believe that emotion is really who we are, when, like all emotions, it comes and goes. I did want to put this piece in. It's a newer piece to the understanding of mindful self-compassion, and that's that it has 2 components. So often people think of the yin side, the soft side, that comforting, soothing, validating. Okay, that's important, really important. But self-compassion and compassion in general has a yang side, and that's the fierce compassion. That's acting in the world, protecting, providing for our loved ones and ourselves, motivating ourselves. And for those of you in the caregiving role, and even those of you with these diseases that we're talking about today, you may have to advocate pretty fiercely for yourself. And that too is part of compassion and self-compassion. But we need this nourishment that I'm talking about today of yin before we can fully, you know, go into the world with the strength and the courage it takes to act with fierce compassion. Or as the poet Joan Halifax says, strong back, soft front. So just to summarize that first little bit, self-compassion involves kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And another way I like to think of it is that it means cultivating these qualities so that you are in, as much as you can, a state of loving, connected presence. Okay, the loving is the kindness for others, for yourself. The connected piece is knowing we're all in this common humanity. And the presence is the mindfulness. So coming back over and over, which side, which pole of those three components am I on right now? And coming back into present moment awareness with equanimity, with acceptance. So, yeah, what does the research say? This is basically what I mentioned in the beginning, but very specifically when we measure it, because it's measurable, low self-compassion scores means we have greater psychological challenges. And as self-compassion scores rise, so does our mental health and our overall well-being. So more specifically, we get depression and anxiety being reduced, more well-being, life satisfaction, and of course, as I mentioned, relationships improve. Our sense of social connection and how we navigate conflict also improves. I like this finding. It helps us manage the aging process, so that's of relevance to myself and many of us, I think. Impact on relationships. I won't say too much about this sense of self, but you can imagine if you have a very negative view of yourself, including that whole domain of body worth and body image, self-compassion can help you transform that from somehow I'm broken or I'm unworthy to a more positive view. And related to that is this increase in intrinsic motivation. That means we'll make these changes toward a healthier lifestyle, not because we're boot camp beating ourselves up, but because we come to see ourselves as worthy of this kindness and support. And we'll talk about, again, reducing compassion fatigue and what that really means. So, burnout, of course, is when we've got too much stress, too much emotionally intense experience happening, whether through work or life itself, and we don't feel we have, and we don't necessarily have the external resources or internal. So why we would offer training in self-compassion is it does directly increase mindfulness, compassion for others. And then I'll say more about compassion satisfaction in a minute, but that's the ability to be caretaking and feel good about it. Okay, it's the difference between emotional depletion and a sense of personal contribution and accomplishment. Okay, and when you train in self-compassion, you see these decreases in stress and depression, but also in measurable markers of burnout. So emotional exhaustion and depersonalization is one of those things we do because we have to. We just can't stay resonating with the pain of another indefinitely. So, and if we do that too long, we can run into secondary traumatic stress. So I won't go into that, but just knowing that self-compassion has pretty specific contributions to this arena of burnout and compassion fatigue. And I'm sure you know this, but it bears saying, for someone to develop genuine compassion towards others, first, he or she must have a basis upon which to cultivate compassion. And that basis is the ability to connect to one's own feelings and to care for one's own welfare. So caring for others requires caring for oneself. So I think we all, I don't know you, but I'm guessing you know that and sense and feel the truth of this. And the question is how? How do we cultivate that knowing of our own feelings, connecting to them, and cultivating compassion for those difficulties that life brings? It does include that self-care. So just to double state, I'm not denigrating self-care, but it also requires practices that help you get in touch with and stay in touch with those difficult emotions that are present. And how do you do that? Well, the MSc folks developed, as Fiona mentioned, a shorter version of the 8-week program. So it's just 6 weeks. It's an hour to an hour and a half, depends who's teaching it, for healthcare communities. So folks like yourselves, where you're providing care or involved in healthcare in some fashion. And it's also got solid research. It's ongoing research, but even this is my point for all of you today. I think even coming for 1 hour is a good thing. 1 hour of self-compassion training is a good thing. And because we have found that a little bit helps. And this 6-week program sees pretty substantial results. And what other research has shown is just a little bit of practice often, okay, and I'll show you a couple of techniques. A little bit of it on an ongoing basis can shift your level of self-compassion. It can increase your mindfulness, okay? So we're playing right now in this world of self-compassion training, mindful self-compassion, with shortening it so that it's accessible to busy people, which is so many of us. Yeah, so that's why I think these trainings are relevant for families and volunteer caregivers like yourselves, because you face, whether you have a paid position or a volunteer position, you face similar challenges as those in the healthcare community in terms of resources, limited resources and time, and the overarching and continuous sort of levels of stress. So yeah, 2 major studies showed these same outcomes. But the one I want to point out here, because there's a little bit of overlap, of course, in the research, but the one I want to point out is that when we look at the whole field of mindfulness research, and it's huge, and we look really closely at it, we find that it's the self-compassion component of mindfulness that often explains the other gains. So when you see mindfulness leads to these gains, that's true, but know that the self-compassion element is the kind of operating mechanism, or the component that often explains why change occurs. Okay. And if you're someone with low levels of self-compassion, what we find is doing these practices, taking these courses, educating yourself about it, people with lower levels of self-compassion benefit even more. So everyone benefits, but those with lower self-compassion benefit even more. And we want to aim for this sense of satisfaction in our work and in our volunteer offerings. We want to bring down that emotional depletion. That's an inevitable part of our work, but increase this sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, because it's one of the most powerful buffers against burning out. When my son was in an accident and was in a trauma ward, this male nurse was his trauma nurse, and he's fine, by the way, but it was a very intense time. And this nurse, one day, big strapping 6-foot guy, says to me, I'm thinking I might move out of trauma, the trauma ward. And I'm like, oh, how long have you been doing it? Well, just over 30 years, but I'm thinking maybe. So he wasn't burnt out. So I share that story because it's possible to do really intense work and stay in that role because you feel satisfied with the work you're doing. And I'll talk in just a minute about the other piece of that. But compassion satisfaction is really a key, I'd say almost a goal for those of you in that role. And we know self-compassionate people have more compassion to give to others. That's just how it is. We know burnout is prevalent, and now I'm telling you, self-compassion is a proven buffer against that. Just a little note here, because sometimes empathy and compassion get rolled together. And I just want to say that neuroscience shows us very definitely they light up different parts of the brain, okay? Very different emotions. They're both social emotions. They both have to do with being with another. But when we resonate with, like you did with that little child, your mirror neurons start firing enough so you feel the pain they're feeling. When we stay in that state of only feeling with the other, it depletes us if that's all we're doing. And empathy is a wonderful quality to have. So we're not saying empathy is bad, but when we remain resonating in that, it leads to what's called empathic distress. And eventually we just have to pull away. That's the negative emotion and non-social behavior, because we know we'll burn out. It's evident if we stay just doing that. And some wonderfully gifted caregivers are so empathetic. But if we're only doing that, we can't, it's not sustainable. So enter compassion. Very similar, but we're feeling for the other. And we have this positive feeling of love and a desire to help. And it's associated with good health, okay, not burning out. And we're able to sustain approaching the other because we're not caught in the part of the brain that it really is just designed to help us feel pain for the other. But it's the Kickstarter, hopefully, for compassion. That's the intention. And here I'm just saying empathy training, if that's all we do, and this has been done, it actually has a negative effect. So just feeling for the other isn't enough. We need to have compassion training, activating a different part of the brain, leading to positive feelings, resilience, better coping, right? That's what we need as caregivers. And I will say, non-caregivers need this too. We need this kind of inner resilience that mindfulness and self-compassion training cultivate. Yeah, this is just more evidence that even a few weeks of loving kindness meditation, which is compassion training in the form of meditation, leads to those same results I was just talking about. Yeah, more evidence that it can be learned. I want to just take a minute to talk about the physiology of self-compassion. And you're going to experience that in a few minutes, but just that when we experience warmth, a touch, soft tone, nurturing tone, our body responds. It doesn't remain in the realm of an idea. So much of mindful self-compassion, the mindfulness and the self-compassion are embodied experiences, okay? It's not just a concept. That's why I'm rushing through the concept part of this. So when, as mammals, we receive loving, warm, touched, soft vocalizations, the brain releases oxytocin. You may know it as the love hormone, and other opiates that generate feelings of trust and safety and love and connection, social connection. Okay, so what's not to like about that? Well, why I'm mentioning it is the other side of how inner self-talk works has a very different impact on the body chemistry. So when the inner critic, or self-criticism, self-judgment is happening, it turns on our threat response. So the amygdala, you probably know, is our fight or flight center, happens faster than before you're aware of a threat. Your amygdala is sending adrenaline and cortisol, raising your blood pressure. So almost instantaneous impact on the physiology of the body, ready to fight or flee or freeze, whatever. Now, the body doesn't know if that threat is real or not, and whether it's external or not. So when we attack ourselves for not being good enough, we're not a good enough caretaker, we're not a good enough patient, we're not a good enough daughter, whenever we come under attack, and you may or may not recognize it as the inner critic, but because we tend to believe those things, but hopefully mindfulness will tease out, oh, that's the critic. Whether the body doesn't care. So it turns on the threat response, and that's when we get this chronic stress, anxiety, depression, emotional depletion. So just small acts of self-compassion can alter that body chemistry. So we bring up the oxytocin, which is going to lower cortisol, and we calm that cardiovascular system. So our blood pressure goes back down. So I'm really trying to sell you here on the, not just the idea of mindful self-compassion as a noble thing, but as a real in your back pocket way of managing your own physiological response to stress. So that's the summary for this little section. Through gentle touch, we activate that mammalian caregiving system, calms us, settles our racing thoughts and stressful feelings, and soothes the body chemistry. And of course, why I include that bit today is it can be done unobtrusively while you're caregiving. So how can you do that, you ask? How can I turn on the mammalian caregiving system when I'm in the caregiving situation? And I'd like to lead you through that. And maybe, Fiona, I'll just ask if there's anything I should know before we go into this little practice. If there are any reason I should slow down or pause or just keep going.
I'm just looking at one question we got here. Yeah, I think that question I'll give to you towards the end. So I think we're good right now for the practice.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, everyone. The practice I'd invite you to participate in is called the Self-Compassion Break. And just a little kind of safety message. If at any point it becomes too much, you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, just pause the practice, open your eyes, doodle, make your to-do list, whatever. Just give yourself a break from it. If it's really a mild level of discomfort, because I'm actually going to invite you all to summon a little bit of suffering or struggle in order to practice this. So if it's a low grade, I'll invite you to sort of let it linger. But if at any point it becomes too much, just pause the practice. Okay. So if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes or to gaze down softly, I invite you to do that and settle into a posture that's supportive for you. Now, that may be seated or lying down or standing, doesn't matter, but just so you're feel the earth beneath you, really supporting you, the weight of your body being held. And take a couple of deep breaths, releasing fully, letting your exhale be nice and long and slow. And then summoning a little bit of suffering. So thinking about your life right now, something that's difficult for you. Could be that you're feeling stress, or it could be a relationship problem. Could be that you're worried about something that might happen. So thinking of something that's difficult, but not overwhelmingly difficult, especially if you're new to this practice. And don't bring up a problem with a child. That's often too emotionally activating. We want to practice here. So we want you to be uncomfortable, but not overwhelmed. So get in touch with what that situation is. Okay, what's going on? What is it that's difficult? Who said what? What's happened or might happen? So really bringing it to life in your mind and in your emotional self. And now I'm going to say a series of 3 phrases, and it'll remind you of those 3 components that I outlined right at the beginning of the webinar, okay? Those 3 elements of self-compassion. So the first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering, right? So you're bringing mindful awareness to the fact that suffering is present. And not everyone is comfortable with that word of suffering, but find words that work for you. So this is really hard right now, or this is a moment of difficulty. This is a tough time for me, okay? I'm really struggling. Or this is a moment of suffering. Whatever works for you, we name it, we acknowledge it. This is a moment of suffering. And the second phrase, this suffering is a part of life. We're reminding ourselves in the moment of our common humanity. Suffering is part of life. And once again, finding words that really resonate for you, okay? It's not abnormal for me to feel this way. I'm not alone. Many people are going through similar things. The degree or flavor of their suffering, might be different, but really, suffering and struggle and imperfection, that's part of life, part of our common bond as human beings. Suffering is part of life. And the third phrase, may I be kind to myself in this moment. And I find it helpful to form it as a question. So what do I need right now? How can I be kind to myself in this moment? And then listen for the answer. The answers come more readily as you practice this self-compassion break. And if you haven't already, I invite you to put one or both hands over your heart. And we use this gesture to remind ourselves that we're really supporting that wish for our own well-being, for offering kindness to ourselves. So see if you can feel into the warmth of your own touch. For some, forming a fist and putting the open hand over the heart feels more supportive, a little more in the fierce compassion realm. So just see 1 or 2 hands over the heart and feeling into that warmth, and maybe now using the language you would use and the tone you would use with a dear friend who was struggling with the same thing. So I'm here for you. It's going to be okay. I'm with you. I care about you. And some folks use a diminutive like, okay, sweetheart, this is tough, but I got you. Or your own name. Patricia, this is a really challenging time. I'm here with you. Okay, I got you. So whatever language works, anything that feels natural to you that expresses your deep wish that you be well, that you be happy, that you be free from suffering. And returning once again before we complete this to the feeling of your own hands on your own body. Noticing the warmth, noticing the touch. And then letting go of the practice, but before you open your eyes, just noting how your body feels right now. And letting whatever's there, whatever sensations, whatever emotions, whatever's present for you right now in your body, just letting it be there. And then as you're ready, opening your eyes and sort of settling back into your environment. And right now I'm imagining that we're in a virtual circle. I don't know where all of you are located, but I'm imagining we've returned now to our virtual webinar circle. And just want you to know that that particular practice, we took about 5 minutes or so, but you can get really good at it so that you are able to just put one or both hands on your heart. And also, of course, it can be on your arms in a sort of hug or other ways that feel supportive to you, but you'll get so you can just put one hand on your heart or both and just whip through the whole of the self-compassion practice in moments. And eventually your hand on your heart will summon the whole embodied experience of self-compassion. Okay. So I really encourage you to practice it. It's on Kristen Neff's website, and when you look at this PowerPoint again, you will see 3 different slides with resources. So this is also on Kristen Neff's website. And I'd like to take you just briefly through one other very, very portable practice that can be done on the spot, on the run. And this one is called compassion with equanimity, or compassionate breathing. And so, again, just sort of settling into your body. And you don't have to close your eyes. It's up to you if you want to. But one or both hands on your heart again. And bring to mind someone that you care about, someone perhaps you're caring for, or just someone you care about, where you're suffering a bit in that caregiving role, or if it's just, it might just be someone you care about that's struggling. Okay. So again, not a child of yours, but just feel for a moment that struggle. And then I'm going to read you a series of phrases and just let them roll through your mind. And I'd say let them roll through your heart. So these are equanimity phrases. So it goes like this: everyone is on their own life journey. Okay, everyone is on their own life journey. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like these can be difficult to bear, yet I may still try to help if I can. So taking a few deep breaths. And as you inhale, imagine drawing compassion into your body, into every cell of your body. Okay, letting each inhalation soothe you, inhaling compassion deeply into all parts of your body. And then On your next exhalation, imagine exhaling compassion to the person who's associated with this struggle that you're having. Okay? So you're inhaling compassion for yourself and exhaling it for the other. And we're just going to take a minute to breathe in for ourselves, out for the other, just at your own pace. In for me, out for you. Or one for me, one for you. Okay? Just marking it as compassion in and compassion out. You may notice how your body is caressed from the inside as you breathe. Okay, our breath expanding, kind of nourishing on the in-breath, and exhaling that compassion to the other. Letting yourself, if you can, sort of float on an ocean of compassion. There's a limitless ocean that embraces all suffering. Okay? And you're floating on that as you inhale and exhale. And I'll repeat these phrases one more time. Everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like these can be difficult to bear, yet I may still try to help if I can. Just tuning in once more to the warmth of your hands or hand on your heart. And again, just allowing yourself to be just as you are. And just noticing what feelings are present for you. And noticing if there were any shifts when you heard those equanimity phrases that I read at the beginning and end. Okay. And then allowing your eyes to open and return. Maybe roll your shoulders or whatever you need. Add a little compassion to the body. You've been sitting for an hour. And again, I want you to know that although we did this as a bit of a longer practice, that you can do it with your eyes open. You can do it while you're sitting with another person. And I can't do two things at once anywhere else in my life, but I can be with a counseling client and breathe compassion in for me and compassion out for her or him, and not lose the train of thought. So I really want to stress that these two practices are very portable and a very quick reconnection with mindfulness and compassion. And I want to thank you all for being here today and open for questions. And Fiona, if you would be so kind as to moderate that.
Sure. Thanks, Patricia. That was really powerful for me anyway. Hope it was.
Wonderful.
We do have one question in the chat, and then I'll unmute people as well. The question is, in those moments when we are reaching burnout and need to step away but cannot, how do we express this to the person we are caring for so they will understand and not feel hurt?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the time for that conversation, if it's possible, is when you're not in that really fragile or vulnerable burning out state. So I really do hope that you'll go home today, everybody, and say, look, I just learned about this cool thing that, is supportive. And you'll talk about it with the person you're caring for. And so you'll develop this shared language that that then when you say, I'm going to offer myself a little compassion, perhaps, I don't know the person that you're talking about, but perhaps you can encourage them to put their hands on their heart. Okay, so of course I could say more, but having a shared language and a shared understanding, and even the statistic that says, as I cultivate compassion for myself, I have more to give. Pardon me. So taking that moment when you're really worn out, oh, pardon me, is actually a great act of compassion for the other person, because you're going to be able to continue doing the work you do. I hope that helps, but I'm open to more on that question or other questions or comments, you know.
Okay, thanks for that. I will just unmute the line and see if anybody wants to ask a question. Anybody got a question they would like to ask? I have one, Patricia, that's maybe more technical. I was just wondering, when you were reviewing the research, how do they actually measure self-compassion?
Yeah, it's a scale that was developed by Kristen Neff, who's one of the co-founders, co-creators of Mindful Self-Compassion. So it's called the Self-Compassion Scale. And I'm pretty sure, well, I know if you go on Kristen Neff's website, you can take the test. So you all could go on and it's self-score. But yeah, so it's empirically supported scale. And yeah, I also, I guess I think when I sent you the bio, it said that we're getting some 6-week programs going, but they are in fact running. We're teaching one now, and we have another 6-week program coming up in January. If anyone is interested, we run those 6 weeks once a week for an hour and a half. So just going a little bit into greater depth about what I've sort of touched on today. But certainly my website's there. I don't have the January sessions up on my website yet, but it will be soon. So I welcome also any comments or questions. You can go through my website, which is at the bottom of all the slides. If you, if anyone has comments or questions about the topic, the program or the practices themselves, I'm happy to direct you to other resources as well.
Great. And did you say your slideshow includes some other links?
It does. So yes, we got up to the self-compassion break. So sorry, we did the compassionate breathing as well, but those equanimity phrases are also there. There's a summary I didn't go through, but that's easy for you to read through. These also are the recommendations. So self-care that works, in building these personal resources, seeking to build that satisfaction in your role, practicing those things we did today. And of course, gratitude is hugely empirically supported and part of the program when we do the bigger program, but savoring and gratitude for things you love. So those were sort of recommendations, then our questions. Okay, here we go. So I've listed some books The first one is the workbook I mentioned. That's really a wonderful resource and a great introductory resource, but also other books, websites. I've got them up there. Interesting, I see I don't have my own, but it is at the bottom of the slides. And then journal articles. So if you were particularly interested in one thing or another, for example, empathy and compassion, I've got a few articles on that. And then there were some other, there's lots of research on being a partner, a caregiver of a partner. So just to know that I've only listed a few of the journal articles, but there's lots of evidence that compassion and mindfulness and yoga as well help with the challenges of being in a caregiving relationship with your partner. So yeah, that was the end of it. So those additional slides will be on your website.
Great, yes. So you'll send them to AMAC and we'll put them on the website for everybody to access.
You bet. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time, so we'll have to close off here. I want to thank you so much, Patricia, for presenting that information. It was a really good, I guess, a short tasting of what's out there in terms of this topic. And glad we have all these resources to follow up on. Yeah, thank you. And
thank you.
Thanks to those who joined us. That's okay. I just wanted to mention to those on the line that we're starting to hold a regular online patient support group that will meet on the first Saturday of each month from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can check the AMAC website to find out how to register for that and for other webinars that we have coming up in December and January. So thanks again, everyone, for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And thanks again to you, Patricia.
My pleasure. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, everyone. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.